Hey there and welcome back to Sea Power. This tutorial, an overview of how to build your own scenario. You need the mission editor, which thankfully is part of the base game. Just go to mission editor and here we have it. Now, once you're in the mission editor, you can see quite a lot of buttons, so let's go over it quickly. The left panel has a couple of tabs. The one on the left is the scenario. What are you trying to build? What's the mission name? How difficult do you intend to make it? 1 through 5 stars, 5 being most difficult, of course. The mission description is the text that's going to show up if you go back to the scenarios and have a look at the list here. So in this case, it has no list, or it has no text. Some of these scenarios do have text. Hunt down several Soviet submarines. That's the text that you place right over here in the mission description. What's the weather like? What is the precipitation? What's the mission date? And whether or not you want to use background data. Background data is basically populating the map or populating the world with additional stuff. They don't have that much yet. They have some British Isles and cities. They have some airports, stuff like that. Generally, I tend to keep this turned off. Next tab, groups. Well, we don't have any groups. For that, we're going to have to use these buttons. So, let's add some units. In this case, I want to have a surface-to-surface engagement over here in the Atlantic. And in order to set where the battle is going to take place, I'm going to drag this ball over. This is the, let's say, the local time zone. So if you set up the ball there, this is where the time is local. So if you set local, it's going to adapt that. Over here we have vessels, submarines, aircraft, helicopters, land units, and load groups. Groups are, let's say, pre-formed units. And once you have your own group set up, you can save it as such and immediately use that in other battle groups or in other scenarios. So in this case, I want to have a NATO group that's heading east. And I want to have a Soviet group heading west. This way, I know sort of what the scenario is going to be. Once you have these two groups, it is important to specify what they are. It is definitely possible to keep them all at group name 1, but it's not very convenient. So I'm going to say this is the, let's say the NATO Surface Action Group. And this is going to be the Soviet, or SOV if you want to, SOVSAG. The Soviet SAG is going to be red. They are going to be a hostile force, or at least in this current condition they are, because I'm playing as blue, player side blue. The mission thing over here, at least currently, does not work, so don't worry about that. You're going to be using your own controls for the blue group anyway. What you also have over here is the chance to spawn. If you want to vary up your scenarios a bit, you can have a unit, for example, another blue unit. You can say maybe there's going to be a unit, but it only shows up 50% of the time. So you don't exactly know if it'll be there or not. And if you do that with enough units, then you'll have a bit of variation if you replay the scenario. I highly recommend just playing around with this and trying to figure out, okay, is this going to be useful? Do I need to have this unit on all the time? It's going to be entirely up to the type of scenario that you're building. Formation, I tend to ignore this. I go with the formation editor. But we don't really have any use for that up until the point where I actually have any additional units in this formation. So let's go with a couple of US ships. I'm going to say this group is led by a Forrestal class aircraft carrier. And once you have this added, you can either use the base Forrestal, or you can say this is going to be, for example, the Independence. The Independence is going to get assistance from an Iowa class battleship, in this case the Missouri. They're going to have a couple of Knox-class frigates. I'm going to say this is going to be, well, let's say the Badger. And we're going to have the Barbie. And for now, that's enough. I don't really need to do a whole lot more. With the formation editor, you can then specify where these ships are going to be. So if you don't have them specified, they'll all sort of be on top of each other. If you don't do anything with this, they will spawn in, I think, the standard loose formation. In this case, I haven't really set anything up yet. I want to have the battleship in front of the carrier, led also with the escorts. So like that. That's the formation. Now, remember that load group button? This is where the save group button comes in. So I can save this. And I can say this is NATO SAG example. And that's going to be saved. And I can now go and add that NATO SAG example. And you can plug that right down. It's the same formations, the same units, all the same information right there. Once you have this, you can go to what sort of speed they should be traveling at. The heading isn't currently translated yet, but we have told them you should be heading east, so they're probably going to be at about 090, so due east. You can tell them to go faster or slower. This is going to be far more important if you're looking at, for example, a submarine. A submarine that's doing a head full or a head flank is very, very loud, and as such, I wouldn't really recommend running a submarine at full speed. Generally, running a surface group at a head standard is fine. Something else you can do here is set up how trained these guys are, how full their stores are, so how many ammo they, or how much ammo they have. I haven't found that these things work yet, but once they do, you can also play around with those, and same for damage. You can also specify whether it's a high value unit, whether its radars, sonars, towed arrays and stuff are on or off, and this is going to be entirely up to you and what you want to do with the scenario. Now, I have just placed down these two units, but I want to make sure that they do meet. Not somewhere next week, but ideally in a reasonable amount of time. And right now, they're about 290 miles. So this means that at 30 knots, if they're traveling at each other at 30 knots, which they generally won't, they're going to take 6 hours to meet at point-blank range. Not likely to happen, but it's possible. I highly recommend that you make use of these buttons, the ruler, the marker, and the circle, to figure out what the ranges are going to be. For example, if you want to have two submarines square off, you can say, well, I want them to be able to find each other within a reasonable period of time, so I'm going to set up a range circle, and I'm going to say this is a red sub heading northeast, northwest, you're going southeast. This is a US Los Angeles class, and this is going to be, for example, a Charlie class, and this way I know that they're going to be fairly close to each other. So definitely encourage using that ruler. Once you have that for the blue 4, you can also do it for the red 4. I'm going to say this is going to be, let's say, a Kara class missile cruiser. I tend to start with the biggest ship of the formation, let's say the capital ship, the core, because that way that's the leader of the formation. It's just far easier that way. They're going to have a cannon class destroyer, they're going to have 2 Grishes, and that'll be them done. So again, let's form these guys up. You can form these up any way you like. If you want to, you can form them up 60 miles out, for example, but that would just be a bit weird. They would be very, very far apart, and technically they would still be a formation. Practically, they're not really there to help each other. They just happen to be in the same formation, so they're going to be sort of going the right way. But ideally, keep them fairly close. Now, once you have these, you can essentially start your mission. Always save your mission before you do. And in this case, it's going to stream it, or it's going to save it to a specific folder. I'm going to say I'm going to stream this, or I'm going to save this as S17 example scenario. Save. Mission saved. Excellent. You can now play it, and the mission will play. But we don't really have much going on. There isn't exactly any win condition. So that's where the next tab comes in. Triggers. I think triggers is not an ideal term. I would personally probably call them events. Because what you do when you add a trigger is really adding an event. So this is going to be, when does blue win? What does blue need to do? This is not a trigger, this is something that gets triggered by a condition. So when this condition happens, the trigger will happen. So in this case, I'm going to say red force destroyed. That is the condition. The game does not really know what you mean when you say red force destroyed. So we're going to have to specify what that means. And that's where you go to condition type. In this case, I'm going to say unit is destroyed. This means that units have to be destroyed. And what sort of units are those going to be? Well, they're going to be units from the Soviet Surface Action Group. I'm just going to add all the units. And this way, once you have all the units killed off, you will win the scenario. You can also change this, and you can say, no, I just want to be in a situation where the car is destroyed, and then you can win. Great. That's the condition. But then, that's just a condition, and blue wins, but nothing actually happens. So we need to set that up as a message. So you can now set a message to the blue side saying, congrats! Congrats, you've won. Or you can specify this as a very large mission briefing. I tend to use ChatGPT to help me write the messages to the player, and that way it becomes a little bit more interesting than just that. You can also say when this happens, so when that red task force is destroyed, the mission exits. And once we're here, we can also say victory. Is this a victory trigger? Yes, it is. For who? For blue. So this way you can now play as blue, and if you are able to eliminate all of these ships, then you will win the fight. In this case, however, I just set up the Kara, so I'm going to add all to group, and that should fix it. We can now play the scenario as blue. I can also say, no, I want to play as red. But red doesn't have a victory condition yet. So in this case, I'm going to add another victory condition. So this is the red win, which is pretty much the same, but in reverse. Blue for destroyed. Blue 4. There we go. I'm going to say this is a unit destroyed. And with that, of course, we're going to have to specify who gets destroyed. Now make sure you pick the right group, because we want to have NATO get destroyed. So I'm going to add all of those. And that is a victory trigger for red. And you can say, as a message to the red player, the capitalists have been defeated. Long live the Soviet Union. There. Now we have a sort of playable scenario, because this is a victory condition for red. We have a victory condition for blue. That's pretty much it. But let's make it a bit more interesting. Let's set up a briefing. For that, we're going to add a new trigger, and this is going to be the briefing trigger, or rather, the briefing event. I'm going to say it's going to be a new condition, and this is the briefing trigger. The briefing trigger is going to happen when you load into the mission. So this one is not a generic condition, it's a timed condition. And this way, I'm going to set up the time and date, and say after 0 seconds of loading into the scenario, you're going to get a message. You don't need to interact with any of these other parts. You just need to go to messages. Your objective: destroy the Soviet surface action group. And I can now copy this over, and I'm going to say paste that, destroy the NATO surface action group. So it's going to spawn a message for blue, and it's going to spawn a message if you switch to red. And this way you can make the scenario playable as either side. This way I would recommend saving it again, as for example, in this case, Soviet. So now I know that in this particular mission I'm playing the Soviets, and if I load up the other mission, I'm going to be playing as the NATO forces. So that is how the groups and the triggers work. But with triggers you can also do some additional things. You can set up a trigger that happens when a unit enters an area, and that can trigger some pretty interesting things. So let's say Soviet SAG malfunction. I'm going to say the Soviet SAG, so the Soviet Surface Action Group, has entered an area. Enter area. And this is going to be unit enters area. Now, the condition position is when, or rather where, that happens. So when the Soviet SAG enters this position, this trigger is going to fire. This is going to be the condition. But then what happens? That's the question. You can say, well, it's a victory. In this case, you might want to make it a scenario where the Soviets have to escape. So I can say the Soviets are being chased, so they're going that way, and NATO is trying to pursue them. That is when you can use one of those conditional location triggers. In this case, let's change that to runs away. And I can either make that, for example, an exit mission. Like, hey, you reached your destination, congratulations. Mission complete, victory trigger for red. Or I can do something else, like saying, well, I'm sorry, the Kara has malfunctioned. And in this case, I can say, I'm going to have a task force swap. I'm going to swap a unit to task force neutral. So what I'm basically doing is taking away control of the Kara. But that also requires the action units. So what unit is required in this action? Well, it's going to be the Kara. And if this happens, for example, I sail over there, I can say, sorry, the Kara has malfunctioned and it's going to be under neutral control now. This way you can have events happen when you enter a specific location, such as malfunctions, such as victory conditions. You can even have additional units spawn, you can enable additional triggers. You can do a lot with these triggers, but it's a bit too complex to feature that all in a relatively short video. Next up, we have our scenario. Lovely. How do we get this to the mission, or how do we get this to the Steam Workshop? Because that's part 2. If you want to share this mission with other people, you're going to have to get it up to the Steam Workshop. I'm going to say this is S17 example scenario. Mission difficulty, I don't know, probably 2 stars. Good luck taking out a Soviet SAG. I'm going to switch it back to blue. I'm going to say save that as, in this case, not Soviet, but NATO. Save. Okay. Right now, we're going to go back to Windows Explorer. Let me show you. Once you're back in Windows Explorer, you're going to go to Steam Library, Steam Apps, Common, CPower. Then we're going to go to CPower Data. Then we're going to go to Streaming Assets and User. Over here, you can find a missions folder. And now I'm going to look for my own mission. I'm going to say example scenario NATO. I'm going to copy that one over. So Control C. I'm going to go back to Streaming Assets. I'm going to say new folder. So this is going to be Stealth 17 example scenario. Over here, I'm going to open this. And now I'm going to say new folder, missions. In there, I'm going to add the mission. Now I do need to do one additional thing, which is create a file that has a bit of information about this particular mission. An info.ini file. So I'm going to copy this over from one of the others, and I'll also provide the text for that down below. I'm going to open this one, and this is going to sit in the same folder. So Stealth 17 example scenario, we have the missions folder. There's our mission file, the NATO ini, and here is our info.ini. So I'm going to say this is going to be Stealth 17's example scenario. Description. This is an example of how to publish to the workshop. Save that and done. Now we need to do one more thing. We need to have a thumbnail. Now this is optional, but I do prefer having thumbnails in the Steam Workshop because it just looks better. In case you're unfamiliar with the thumbnail, this is basically what you're looking at, this square picture. This is important, it has to be a square picture. The way that I tend to go about it is just use Canva. So let's do that. In case you were unfamiliar with Canva, it's a very nice, typically free program, although I'm personally using the paid version to get some additional features, that allows you to very quickly create images such as this. The way that I go about it is I take a screenshot from the mission, and then I add, in this case, my logo, I add CPower, and then I add a text. So in this case, I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to say this is going to be example scenario. This does not quite fit, so we're just going to make it into one line. The submarine image is not particularly suitable to this one. So let's just say it's going to be, I don't know, a surface ship. Ideally, you want to have the surface ship in there. I'd say that is actually part of the mission, because that does make a little bit more sense. But I guess this will work. Now you're going to download that as a JPEG, not as a PNG. Make it a JPEG, otherwise it does not understand it. I'm going to download that and plunk that back into the folder for the mission. So back to the example scenario missions folder. We now have the folder itself, we have the info.ini, and we have the thumbnail, example scenario. Now we're going to go back to SteamPower. Now we're going to go back to CPower. Now that we're back in CPower, I'm going to go into the mod manager and say create a new mod. And this is where I'm going to pick the folder that we've just created. So that is going to be Stealth 17 example scenario. Don't pick the missions folder, just pick the base folder. Open that. Pick the image that you want to have for your folder. So that's going to be in missions. It's going to be my example scenario.jpg. There's the image. And I'm going to say I don't want to update existing. I want to add a new one. So this is going to be S17 example scenario. Welcome to this example scenario. And that's it. Then you just submit. Once you do that, it typically opens up Steam, and here's how that looks. For a little bit of time, you're going to see the current visibility is hidden. The item will be visible to you, admins, and anyone marked as a creator. And if you refresh, typically that immediately replaces. So now we have a new thumbnail. We have our Stealth 17 example scenario. We have the text that we added in. You can add additional things, such as a link to a YouTube video. You can add additional images so that you have, for example, a bit of an overview of where does this take place. You can create a different description. You can add a lot of different stuff to it. If you're happy with it, well, you're pretty much done. And that is how you put them on the workshop. If you are going into into CPower, you create a mod and you just pick a mission without using, for example, let's say playable, no, not breakthrough. Here. If you don't have the info.ini we created, you're going to end up with this. It does not have a name and it has missing text. Whereas if you have that info, or rather _info.ini, you can see that it has a name, and you can see that it has the subtext. I should also be able to see, yeah, here it is, my example scenario. Right now it's set as local, because I'm loading it in from my own PC, but once you have it on the workshop and you download it from there, you can see it comes from the workshop. And that's how you do it. It is pretty straightforward to add them to the workshop, but there is just this little extra step that makes it better. Adding that _info.ini. As for the scenarios, you can go ham. You can do a lot of different things with it. It's a pretty potent system, and I do expect that they'll be able to expand more upon it, and especially as we get more missions, or as we get more units, you can definitely expect more features to that particular editor as well. As for now, I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, by all means, let me know down below. Experiment. Just try to make a mission. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time around, because the more weird things happen, the funnier it tends to be, and the more you will learn from your experience. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, post them down below. I'll see if I can answer them, and good luck building your missions. If you have any good ones, do let me know down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon for more.